because I think we had a really good discussion yesterday, a lot of really good questions. So the question that I got, actually, one of the questions that I got yesterday was about percentage of moisture, how that converts, inches of water in per feet of soil or water holding capacity. How does that translate to percentages? I just briefly answered that question that it varies with the soil. So I did not want to give you a vague answer. So I did some research. I got a really good research paper yesterday that I'm going to share with you. That is from Oklahoma, US. And I got another question this morning from one of the audience members that is related to the same thing. So let me read out the question. The question that I got here is the person said, water holding capacity for clay soil is 50 mm per foot, which is 2 inches, 50 mm per foot. So that becomes half a megaton. We will call it megaliters. So basically 500,000 liters on 1 hectare basis. As you mentioned, almond roots go 4 feet deep. So did you mean we should irrigate 0.5 times 4 equals 2 megaliters, or he said megatons? Is it must to fill up field capacity on every irrigation? That's one question. Another question is about the KC data for almonds and the ETC. I will go to the next questions later, but this is a really interesting question, and I'm glad you brought it up to clarify some of the things. Let me pull up my presentation here. Okay, supplemental slides. All right, so first, we were talking about the water holding capacity of clay soils. That is true. That is about 50 mm. That translates to 2 inches of water per foot. That is the water holding capacity of the soil. That means that soil can hold that much water. It's its capacity. Okay, so the reference back and forth that we did yesterday to the water holding capacity of the soil is particularly when we're talking about the micro irrigation systems like drip irrigation, where we are spoon feeding the tree only for the demand of the tree to replenish that demand every irrigation. We refer to the water holding capacity of the soil as a reference so that we do not irrigate beyond that capacity in any way, because that will actually waste a lot of water. And in fact, we would not be providing enough water to the trees. Then, we can give an example of sandy soils. Before I go further, I need to clear up some terms. Field capacity. Field capacity is the capacity of the soil to hold the water in the smaller pores after much of the water from saturated soil has been drained with gravity. Okay, so at field capacity is not saturated soil. Okay, so the first is saturated soil, fully saturated soil that is packed with every single pore in the soil is packed with water. That would be a saturated soil. Okay, and after the water drains through gravity, usually in varies with the soil, but usually in the soils that we grow almonds in, next day or maybe in 2 days, and the soil after fully saturation, if we have a lot of rains, after about 2 days, maybe 3 days, the soil will come to field capacity. Okay, so field capacity does not mean that the soil is fully filled with water. There is about 1 quarter, 25% pore space that is empty, that there is air in the bigger pores, but the smaller pores are holding water. Okay, so that is the soil at field capacity. Now, on the other side of the things, there is permanent wilting point. Okay, permanent wilting point is basically a physiological indicator, but permanent wilting point is a point in water availability where water is no longer available to the plants. So that does not mean that there is zero water in the soil. As you see with the type of the soils, if we go from sandy to clay, the permanent wilting point still has a lot of water in the soil. It is just that that water is not available. It's not available to the plants for taking up, because close to permanent wilting point, when the water is being lost or being pulled up from the soil, as the permanent wilting point comes closer, the soil's water potential becomes too negative. Okay, so ranging from minus 50, I would say in the bars, minus 50 to minus 500 sometimes. So it depends. So that water is really, really tightly held, that it's not available to the plants anymore. Okay, so between the field capacity and the permanent wilting point, there is this window that we call is available water. We call it TAW, total available water. In actual practices in crop production, and particularly in orchard productions, we don't even take this available water for granted. Okay, because this available water, if we want to use every single drop of this available water, we will be hitting permanent wilting point every time, and that's not good for trees. That's not possible for a productive orchard system. So we further go down and say that, okay, we are only allowed to take 50% of that total available water. We only go 50% down towards wilting point and call it depleted. So then we apply more water. So that 50% of the available water, we call it as maximum available depletion. So see how it gets reduced from saturation to field capacity to maximum allowable depletion. Okay, so to go back to the question, when we were talking about half a megaton for 1 hectare, that is the full water holding capacity of the clay soil. Okay, so and then we said that, okay, do we need to apply half a megaton for every foot of the soil at every irrigation? No, because think about this. We do not deplete that water to zero. Even if your trees go to wilting point, there is still, if you're talking about clay soil, there is still if you have 50 mm total in the beginning, and you hit the permanent wilting point, your clay soil still has 25 mm of water sitting in there, right? That is always going to stay there in an orchard production system, unless you put that soil in the oven and then just make it stone dry, right? So practically what the scenario is, you do not go into those full cycles every time. Practically what happens is, when we start in the season, we start with full soil profile, because we usually have winter rains. So the soils do not deplete of water. The trees are not using water. So there is enough soil moisture. Mostly if it's a good rain year, the soils stay at field capacity during the winter season. So when you are starting with field capacity, now you are, and you're going into the season. So basically we are starting with, say 40 mm of water availability. And then if you go back to my June example, in June, maximum daily water use is 8 mm. For example, in my examples. Excuse me. So now if you are spending 25 mm of water over 3 days, or 50 to 60 mm of water your trees are utilizing in 1 week, so now you are basically irrigating for weekly cycles or 14-day cycles if you're flood irrigated. If you are drip irrigation system or sprinkler, you may be irrigating on a 3-day cycle for 25 mm usage of the plants. So in the season, we try to meet the field demand, plant demand. Every time we fill the profile, we fill it to field capacity. But that does not mean we fill it to the total water holding capacity of the clay soil, because there is always threshold water there. Okay, so we replenish it back to bring it to field capacity, and then the trees slowly use the water. Okay, so I hope I answered that question. This is one of the USDA's. I would like to show you from the Oklahoma study. So this is basically the soil metric potential, and this is the volumetric water content of the soil. And for different soils, it is different. Going from 35%. This is clay loam soil, the heavier soils. 35%, and when they reduce in percentage of water, they really go down. The soil metric potential goes really exponentially goes negative. Okay, so here is the chart. Depending on the soil texture, this is the percentage moisture at field capacity. The clay soils have about 40% in this case in Oklahoma soil types. 40% moisture is at field capacity. Now the permanent wilting point is 22% water. So that means that we cannot go beyond this moisture percentage. So we only have 40 minus 22. The total available water is only 18%. That window is total available water. Further, in an almond orchard system, we only use 50% of that water. So the maximum allowable depletion would be only 9%. So translate that to, if you start with the field capacity at 50 mm, this is permanent wilting point is right around 25, 27 mm, and total available water would be around 20 to 22 mm, and we are only allowed to use 11-12 mm of water every irrigation cycle before we put more irrigation. Okay, so this is again, this is a study done in the US. This is to give you a general guideline. What I realized from our discussion yesterday, that all these the components that we discussed about irrigation scheduling, the crop coefficient, evapotranspiration, I think these are to generally educate the people on what are the finer details of finer components or principles of irrigation. What I think we really need to do is train people. There are people in the audience who work in the industry. So I would highly encourage you guys to develop your Excel sheet programs, basically simple programs for different soil types, different scenarios, and different weeks of the year, different locations based on the evapotranspiration. So you plug in those numbers, you plug in those formulas, and here we have a lot of people in the field do that. They have Excel sheets on their computer. All they do is they just plug in the recent numbers for that week's data, and then come up with the numbers of irrigation runtime for that particular orchard. So what I'm trying to do is to basically empower you with knowledge so that you can be able to do that on your site or on your particular conditions. Okay. The second question was, where can I get KC data for almonds? I have a couple of different versions of KC data in my folder. The FAO study goes back several decades. There's one recent one as well. I can give all of them to the hosts. And I have two different studies from University of California for Californian conditions. So I can give all the charts. I have a few tables and charts for the almond KC, the crop coefficients. So obviously it helps if you have a local research done specific on local climate conditions, but still these numbers will be good to get started. The third one, last one, is the question: when we calculate ETC by the formula from your slide, what numbers we get? Is it daily demand? The slides that I showed you over evapotranspiration of the crop, ETC, and that gives you the crop daily water usage, or you can say crop daily water demand. It does not give you the number that you need to apply, because remember, there are always system losses, inefficiencies in the system. So the number that you get from ETC is what your trees ended up using during that particular day or during that particular time. Whatever time you put the ET reference ET for, or if you just put daily reference ET, you get daily water demand, and then you can multiply that with 3 days if your reference transpiration stays the same. So that is just the demand. What you need to apply, that will be definitely greater than that, because you need to factor in the losses and other inefficiencies. I hope that helps. So let's get started on and save your questions for the end of the session, so we can go back to the irrigation questions again if needed. Let's go back to the, let me pull up my presentation for today. Okay, so I'm downloading it. Okay, almond fertilization practices. All right, so do you see my slides, almond fertilization practices? So I decided to not go into the basic concepts this morning. We can actually revisit those back again in the end, depending on what kind of questions you have. Otherwise, some of you already should have that material. Okay, so let's talk about the young almond trees. The first year almond trees, we had a few questions about young almond trees yesterday. Just like the irrigation scheduling, calculating the fertilizer demand for the young trees is really difficult, because the trees are continuously growing, and we not only need to replenish their needs for that season, but we also need to supply anticipating for the future. So there is always some guesstimate for how much those trees will need in order to grow more branches and grow bigger framework, right? So there have been some research trials done in California. So those research trials gave us some broader guidelines on how to irrigate, how to fertilize the young trees. Okay. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is the young trees, we need to apply more fertilizer because they have to grow more. However, we also run the risk of burning their roots if we apply too much fertilizer, because we need to apply the fertilizer in a very small space. The root ball is really small. And if we apply fertilizer away from the tree, it is wasted. So all the fertilizer that they need for their future demand, it is going to go to their root system. So we need to be really careful on the way we supply, on the frequency, how often we supply the fertilizer, so that we do not burn the roots. If you over irrigate, that can actually harm those young trees. So the recent study in California that I'm talking about, it roughly came out to be that the first year trees need, in terms of nitrogen, need about 90 to 120 grams of nitrogen per tree for a first year through the whole season. Okay, and that is actual nitrogen. Okay, there was a trial done in a sandy soil, relatively really sandy soil down in the Central Valley here. Okay, that doesn't mean that, and if you try to apply all this nitrogen at once, you're going to burn the roots. So the recommendation was to split it in at least 4, 5, or even maybe 6 applications. For potassium and phosphorus, first, we talked about this yesterday as well. Before you're planting, you need to know your soil. And one of the steps knowing your soil is looking at the soil test reports. So you need to know your potassium and phosphorus levels in the soil. Here we have a situation in California that we have enough resident phosphorus in the soil. The soils are natively rich in phosphorus. So we don't especially need to apply a lot of phosphorus. One thing about phosphorus is that, if you apply large amounts of phosphate fertilizers, the phosphorus is basically, it binds really well with the clay particles. Okay, so phosphorus availability is more of an issue from availability from soil to the trees roots. That is more of an issue rather than phosphorus levels in the soil. Potassium, so you need to know where you're staying in terms of your potassium levels in the soil. Typically, we provide an NPK blend for the first year, like 15-15 or 12-12. So that has 12% NP and K. Okay, that is also important because phosphorus is important for root growth, and the first year trees need healthy root growth. So it helps in establishing the trees. So these blends are commonly used during the first years. Now, these blends sometimes they come in soils in liquid form, in solution form that you apply through the irrigation system, but you have to be really careful because it's really easy to apply those in a concentrated manner, and the root burn can harm the trees. So during the first year, we apply the fertilizer at least 3 to 5 times, maybe more, 4 to 6 times during the season. The idea is based on that research. The recommendation was that no more than 30 grams of nitrogen per tree per application. Okay, so that is the take-home message from that trial. Okay, so how we can avoid the root burn? Because applying large doses of liquid fertilizers concentrated in the root zone, if we want to avoid that, we have the option of controlled release or slow release fertilizers. Most of them come in granular form, the granules, and you can actually apply to each tree manually, or there are some methods to apply mechanically as well. The good thing about slow release fertilizers is that they can be applied in a single large dose in the beginning of the season, and they will supply all season long in most of the soils because they are slow release, right? So that's a good thing because you don't have to apply over and over again during the season. If you're doing this manually through labor, it will reduce the application cost in terms of labor. Okay. So, but the thing is that you have to apply water in order for those granular formulation to dissolve and get pushed down to the root zone. Sprinkler systems are really suitable for these kind of applications of slow release fertilizers. Drip irrigation systems, not so much. So if you have a sprinkler system and you want to apply slow release fertilizer and then start the sprinkler system, that's a good situation. So that the trees will actually get those nutrients in a timely manner. Okay, so a couple of more considerations for first year applications. Don't apply the fertilizer right after planting. So we need to actually plant the trees and let the trees establish, let the trees come out of the transplanting shock. And the roots, once the roots start establishing and the trees start pushing new growth, at least about 20, 30 centimeters of growth, that's when you should apply the first dose of fertilizer. Okay, so after the first dose that you apply, the next doses can be applied every month or so, or maybe every 3 weeks, depending on the growth potential of the trees, depending on the weather, depending on your soil type. You can split the doses throughout the season. The other consideration is that, especially during the first couple of years, and it's a common recommendation that for all trees, don't apply the last fertilizer dose too late in the fall, because that will disrupt the trees going into dormancy. So apply the last dose in late summer so that the trees can be put to rest in fall for the winter season. Okay, so these are fertilizer product examples that we use here in California. Sorry. I mentioned about 15. It comes in the granular form. It's high in ammonium form, it's low in urea. It has some percentage of urea form. 12 also comes in granular. It is all in the 100% ammonium form. Then for the grown-up trees, mature trees, we use the nitrate forms mostly because they are readily available. They also have high leaching potential, but CAN 17 is in liquid form. It has 17% nitrogen. It is high in nitrate form and some ammonium. It's usually applied to the bigger trees, and they're more prone to it's more prone to leaching down below the soil profile. So you have to be really careful in doing the spoon feeding. UAN 32 has 32% nitrogen. It's in liquid form again. It's a mix of urea, ammonium, and nitrate, and that's what UAN stands for. Other fertilizer products that we commonly use here are potassium nitrate, calcium nitrate, urea, ammonium sulfate. They are granular formations, and depending on the orchard needs for potassium or calcium, these can be applied during the first year as well. The best approach is to go by the soil nutrient analysis for the first year. For example, your soil may be high in phosphorus, or there could be potassium supply already, so you don't have to go with the 15, or you can just go with some other formulations. I know world over, the fertilizer prices have almost doubled over the last year. So we need to actually be really careful on what you're going to apply and how much you want to. So we don't want to waste anything. Potassium fertilizer, fertilization, and sources of potassium fertilizers. Mature trees need potassium for fruit growth. So always every year there is a recommendation to have enough potassium applied during the season. We want to, every year, we want to build the potassium reserves in the trees. So we usually apply potassium in bulk in fall. We just, alongside the tree row, we put potassium fertilizer in a band, and with the early rains or the late irrigations, that potassium is pushed down to the root zone, and the trees build up potassium in the tissues before the dormant season, and that potassium is available for the next season in the spring and summer for fruit development. This works well in relatively heavier soils. Potassium can leach down below the root zone. So if you are applying, if you have sandy soils, we do not recommend applying potassium in bulk in heavy doses in fall, because then you are likely to leach most of that fertilizer during the winter months when the rains come. Okay. So depending on the soil's cation exchange capacity, one of the other parameters to look at your soil test report is the cation exchange capacity. And the cation exchange capacity is really important for scheduling your potassium fertilization, for example. Okay, in some soils, like I said, low cation exchange capacity soils, it is wise to apply potassium during the growing season through the irrigation system. Excuse me. Sometimes potassium fertilizer can also be tank mixed with some other foliar applications if your orchard is too low on potassium. But usually it's enough when you apply through the irrigation system through the season. This thing applies to the soils with low cation exchange capacity, usually the sandy soils, where the cation exchange capacity is less than 30 equivalents. A few blends for potassium that are used in California is potassium nitrate that supplies nitrogen also. Another really good product that we have used here in California is potassium thiosulfate. It also supplies sulfur. It's 0,025 and then 17 sulfur. So it has 17% sulfur, 25% K, and 0N and 0P. Okay, potassium thiosulfate has really been used widely in many areas in California. Here for potassium fertilizer and for nitrogen fertilizer as well, we use the leaf levels. We always get leaf nutrient analysis done every year in June or July, in July. Once the fruits are mature in the mature trees, we take the leaf samples and get them tested. So July leaf levels for potassium, the critical value is about 1.4 to 1.5% of potassium. So if in the July leaf samples, your potassium percentage is lower than 1.5 or 1.4, that means your trees are deficient in potassium. So then you need to apply a little bit heavier dose. If your soil type allows that, you can apply a bigger dose in fall and then follow up with some spring and summer applications. So if your value is around 1.5% leaf levels, that means you are only going to apply for the crop demand next year. So whatever the crop demand is, I have in some other slides, for example, potassium, the almond varieties in California, they need somewhere about 70 pounds of potassium for every 1,000 pounds of kernels. Okay, so you can translate it to kgs. The nitrogen leaf levels from July samples, we go by between 2.2 to 2.5. So if your nitrogen percentage is between 2.2 to 2.5%, then all you have to do is match next year's demand for next year's crop and next year's vegetative growth. And that should supply enough nitrogen. Other major nutrients. Calcium is another important nutrient. Leaf calcium levels of 2% is in the adequate range. Phosphorus, leaf analysis levels for phosphorus, if you have between 0.1 and 0.3%, they are adequate. But more than the leaf analysis levels, we actually go by the soil levels of phosphorus. And we try to make the phosphorus more readily available because we know the phosphorus can bind to the clay particles. So, there are a couple of things that you can do to make phosphorus more readily available. If you are applying high phosphorus blend during the first few years, then you can skip phosphorus some of the years, because if you apply heavy doses of phosphorus, it can build enough phosphorus in the soil. Another routine thing is that for phosphorus, because phosphorus is important for root development, then we some farmers here apply phosphorus blends like the NPK blends like 10-34-0, where you have high percentage of phosphorus, about 34%, and then it supplies a little bit of nitrogen as well. Some of the growers also apply that 10-34-0 blend before bloom when there is root flush going on. Calcium can be applied as gypsum, particularly if you have a high pH scenario. Gypsum application can be important to neutralize the soil and also supply the calcium which is needed for the nut growth. Calcium also improves soil health and water percolation. So if you have heavy soils, compact soils, plus high pH, and if you have some salt issues like sodium, for example, on top of that, look at your calcium levels in the soil. And if you improve your calcium levels, if you improve calcium health of the soil, you can actually increase your water penetration in the soil. Calcium nitrate, CAN 17 or calcium thiosulfate, they are commonly used fertilizers in California. Talking about micronutrients. A lot of different micronutrient blends are available. Most micronutrients are supplied by foliar application during the spring and summer sprays. We do recommendations in almonds as well as in pistachios and other crops. 1 or 2 doses of micronutrient mixes, tank mixed with other applications, it's common here in California. However, there are some other nutrients that actually need to be applied in more quantities. For example, zinc or boron, they sometimes, the trees go deficient in zinc or boron. So sometimes you need to supply those nutrients in fall as well. Zinc is best taken up when the new leaves are coming out and the leaf surface is not hardened yet, like the leaf cuticle is not developed. That is best time for zinc uptake. However, the zinc fertilizer, if you're applying in any micronutrient blend, they're usually sprayed in spring. Ideal leaf boron level is 80 to 100 ppm. Boron is a really important micronutrient element. It is important for pollen tube growth. So flower development and pollination, it helps. So if your trees are low on boron, over the last couple of years, I have understood the importance of boron for the almond production system. This is a single important micronutrient that if you ignore this, it can, make a big hole in your production. So you need to catch your boron deficiencies early on. If you get to know in season that the boron levels are low, products like Solubor is a common product that we apply. It contains 21% boron. It can be applied during fall, either in the soil or foliarly. That helps build boron levels in the tree. If your trees are really deficient in boron, then a pink bud stage spray of boron is recommended. So pink bud to 20% bloom is when the bloom is just starting to come out. That's when a spray of boron has shown promise. If you go later than that, it did not have an effect on yield. An important thing about boron is that it accumulates in almond hulls. So getting the hulls tested for boron is really important, critical practice. So every year we tell the growers, when you harvest the almond trees, separate out some hulls, put them in a bag, and send them to the lab. So your boron levels in the hull will serve as a good guide to consider boron applications for next year. I'm not sure where I put that information, but I remember when I was making this slide, I was mentioning that in a recent trial on boron, that even when the boron levels were right around adequate levels, around 80 ppm to 100 ppm, one shot of boron application at pink bud stage increased nut set. Iron is another important micronutrient. Iron chlorosis is commonly seen as the bleached appearance, yellowing of leaves. Sometimes, in light deficiency, if there is a little bit of a deficiency, then the midribs stay green, the vein network stays green in the leaf, and the rest of the leaf is chlorotic. However, in case of severe iron deficiency, the whole leaf can appear like it's washed in the bleach, all across yellow. Iron deficiency commonly happens due to low uptake of iron by the trees and sometimes not necessarily low soil levels. Because one of the things that causes iron deficiency is wet saturated soils. So if the soils are wet, stay saturated all the time, the trees can. Another impediment or another hindrance to the iron uptake is high soil pH. pH higher than 7.5 can impair iron uptake, and you can call it a lime-induced chlorosis. That's really common here in some parts of the Central Valley. So lime-induced chlorosis means that not allowing the tree to uptake enough iron. So in that case, you will be wasting your money if you are iron leaders, right? If you add more iron to the soil without other considerations, then it might not be taken up. So there are a couple of considerations. One is that you can lower the soil pH by acid application. That will help the roots to uptake the iron. Recently, I was talking to a grower and a PCA. University recommendations show that the chelates work in case of iron and copper. So chelates are basically specially designed compounds that actually bind to the iron and it helped the tree uptake those molecules. Okay, so in case of iron, the EDTA iron chelates are not effective. So there are different types of chelates, the EDDHA iron chelates that are recommended in high pH soils. And the PCA that I was talking to this week, he just showed me the trees that came up from iron deficiency when he applied these iron chelated iron. So if the deficiency is not corrected easily and quickly, then you can always consider including iron in foliar application blends to actually remove the stress for the season. Excessive soil salinity can make the things complicated. So avoid using the chloride containing formulations of fertilizers like muriate of potash. If you already have issues with sodium or chloride, then definitely pay attention to what formulation of fertilizer you're applying. Always monitor sodium chloride and boron in the soils and in the leaf tissues. Managing salinity is a whole new task, and that has different components, emphasizing on using soil amendments, careful use of fertilizer products and formulations, and also leaching the salts down with flood irrigation where possible. Now, here I am over the next 5-6 slides. I'm just going to give you a season-long general quick guide to our fertilizer schedule. Okay, this is basically, I don't say that this is a recommendation. I would say that this is so you know that what we do here in on-campus orchards. So we have about 150 acres of almond orchards on California State University campus in Fresno. And we have an orchard manager, a highly qualified orchard manager who works with different consultants and PCAs and myself to do all the orchard management practices throughout the year. I sit down with him every week or so to discuss what's going on. And this quick guide of what he is doing at what time of the year, the quick guide comes from his schedules. Okay, So I just picked the fertilizer schedules on what he does on the trees. Okay. So let's start with the dormant season. We are here in the dormant season. We usually no fertilizer application because the soil temperatures are low. The trees are dormant, so we need to maintain dormancy. The uptake is low, so usually fertilizer applications are not recommended during the dormant season. Late dormant season, the time that we are in now, late January or February, late dormant season, just before bloom. This is the period right now as we're speaking, the almond trees are trying to go new flush of roots. So the first root growth flush in almond trees happens just before bloom. So some of the growers are considering applying some application of phosphorus containing formulations. I mentioned 1034O, liquid ammonium phosphate here on the right corner. So it depends on the soil levels. In some orchards on campus, we need to apply. In some other soils, we have some other formulations that actually enhance the uptake of already available soil phosphorus. There is also a renewed interest in mycorrhizae biostimulant products that actually inoculate the tree roots with the vascular arbuscular mycorrhizae fungi. In the agriculture industry, most of the people are aware of the WAM fungi, and there's a lot of research available that shows that these fungi make association with the soil and the roots of the tree, and they enhance phosphorus uptake by reaching out to phosphorus. One of the major problems with phosphorus is basically the phosphorus is bound to the soil particles. So the root exploration is very essential. So the roots, you have to grow the roots or the root extensions to actually capture the phosphorus element. The vascular fungi makes association with the roots so that it actually makes root extensions that actually get the phosphorus to the roots. Okay. There are a lot of mycorrhizae biostimulant products in the market. It's a mixed thing. Some of the products I've already tried and tested. There are some newer products. They're mostly under trials. So you need to be careful about using a product that claims that it has some benefits. But this can be a good addition to the program. Okay, other considerations pre-bloom. I mentioned boron foliar spray at pink bud if B levels are low. The research shows that pre-bloom boron applications increase nut set when boron was less than 120 ppm. Okay, one consideration, I have not seen any boron toxicity issues in Georgia when I visited the fields, but still, because I did not visit every part of the country. So in California, we have some places where you have boron toxicity. There is already high levels of boron in the soil. And boron is one of those micronutrients, one of those nutrients where you can also easily build toxic levels. So always try to remain in terms of boron for almonds, always try to remain below 150 ppm in the hull boron content. If the boron touches 200, or more than 200, that can actually affect the trees negatively. It can create a lot of salt stress. Okay, so avoid toxicity of boron. During the bloom, we avoid fertilizing during the bloom. During the bloom, the soil temperatures are not warm enough. There are no leaves on the trees yet, so the trees are not ready to uptake any nutrients. Plus, during the bloom time and then after bloom, nut set and leaf out time, we have enough nutrient reserves in the trunk and the branches of the tree that we built last year. Those nutrients are recycled back. For example, nitrogen and potassium. They get recycled back to bring the bloom, to help the nut set and help with the leaf out. So some of the growers asked me this question last year, that do we need to apply fertilizer during bloom? Because there were some growers who were just applying some nitrogen during the bloom time. And we did some discussion with researchers, and the answer is you don't have to. Sometimes during the bloom or even after the bloom, there are rains. So if you're applying some nitrogen fertilizer, particularly in the soil, you can waste that fertilizer because the soil uptake does not happen well after bloom. Okay, so then we have nut set, and a few weeks after bloom, we apply the first dose of nitrogen, followed by weekly or bi-weekly nitrogen fertilization based on the budget that we develop. Okay. For nitrogen, it is recommended to spoon feed the trees with smaller doses. Nitrogen is applied through the season by following a pre-developed nitrogen budget, which is based on previous year's yield and based on this coming year's expected yield. So we develop a budget. I have slides on how to develop the nitrogen budget. We discussed already last year. I can give you some reference to that if needed. In California, about 80% of the total nitrogen budget for the season is applied between the nut set and hull split. Okay, so that is usually in California, that's usually month of March, April, May, and June. So in 4 months, we apply 80% of the total nitrogen budget. We typically, for a 3,000 pound crop, that is about 3,000 kilograms per hectare, or 3,200 kilograms per hectare probably. So for 3,000 kilograms per hectare, the trees need about 200 pounds of actual nitrogen per acre. And we can convert that to kilogram per hectare, and then we based on the nitrogen use efficiency, we typically calculate on the basis of 70% nitrogen use efficiency, because we know that 30% of nitrogen gets lost down below or in the soil. So only 70% of the applied nitrogen gets to the tree roots. So based on that, we apply typically about 250 to 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Okay, that roughly translates to 250 to 300 kilograms per hectare, right? That is the common application. Now, there is another study that I have in my slides, that applying more than 300 pounds where it was not needed, applying excessive amounts of nitrogen, did not increase yield. In fact, it actually decreased yield because it created some other issues, like it increased hull rot disease. It could increase a lot of vegetative growth where you did not have enough fruit load, and extra nitrogen also accumulated in the hulls and did not benefit the kernels. So there is no benefit in applying excessive nitrogen. Okay, so then comes spring. During the spring, the micronutrient blends are usually applied. These blends contain zinc, copper, manganese, magnesium, molybdenum, iron, and these blends are commonly sprayed along with other foliar sprays in the tank mixes. During the spring and summer season, potassium fertilizer is also supplied through the irrigation system. Between hull split and harvest, usually no fertilizer is applied because the trees have gotten right around hull split, some nitrogen, some last doses for the in-season nitrogen, pre-harvest nitrogen might be applied. But other than that, usually there is no fertilizer activity close to the harvest. Then after harvest, in the post-harvest season, remaining nitrogen budget is applied in one dose, depending on how much you already applied. By the time we have the post-harvest period, that is usually in August, our July leaf sample test reports are out, so we can look at those test reports and supply those nutrients, that nitrogen if needed. Some people, if the July nutrient levels show enough nitrogen in the system, then we skip the post-harvest fertilizer, particularly post-harvest nitrogen, or we can reduce the post-harvest nitrogen. We have time to adjust in the post-harvest time. Then comes fall, before dormancy in heavier soils with high cation exchange capacity. Potassium fertilizer can be applied in bands along tree rows. In fall, boron can also be applied in soil in the powder granular form in the soil and to build tree reserves, or boron can also go in solution form of foliar spray along with the zinc sprays in fall. In fall, our orchard manager here also applies zinc sulfate in late fall, and that is number one, to actually build the zinc levels in the tissue for the next season, but it also helps in advancing the leaf fall. So we apply heavy doses of zinc sulfate, 25 to 30 kilogram per hectare, at one time right before leaf fall, so that the leaves fall quickly and the trees go rest quickly. Nitrogen fertilizers should not be applied later than late summer. We do not apply any nitrogen fertilizers here on campus later than the last pre-harvest dose, last post-harvest dose, because nitrogen applied late disrupts dormancy engine for the trees. Nitrogen applied late can also trigger late leaf out, which can make the trees more susceptible to frost damage. So in late harvested cultivars, which is common in Georgia, you don't have a large window between the harvesting of the trees and the first frost. So you need to be really careful not to go too late, particularly in your nitrogen applications, because late nitrogen applications can actually make the tree more susceptible to the frost. Okay, all right, so this is my last slide of this practical information. So with that, I think we can probably go to the questions, and then in the light of the questions, I'm sure some of the questions will be about the nitrogen or other nutrient demand of the almond trees. Then we can actually go back to our other slides that I have not shown you today. And then if needed, we can also take a 5-minute break. We did not take a break yesterday, so I realized. Thank you very much for listening. Hello? I cannot hear anything.
We can break for 5 minutes and then continue with Q&A. What do you think?
Okay, great. Thank you.
პრინციპში ჩვენ შეგვიძლია რომ დავსვათ შეკითხვები ამ თემასთან დაკავშირებითაც და წინა დღის თემასთან დაკავშირებითაც რომ გამოვიყენოთ მაქსიმალურად შესაძლებლობა.
ჩეთში რომ დავწეროთ უკეთესი ხო არ იქნება?
პრინციპში შესაძლებელია, ინგლისურად შეძლებთ რომ დაწეროთ?
დიახ, ვეცდები.
ოკეი. პრინციპში ჩატში შეგვიძლია დავწეროთ და დავსვათ კიდევაც, ანუ შეზღუდვა არ იქნება, არ ამგონი. თავია წავიკითხოთ და წაიკითხოს გარეტმა და უპასუხოს.
ამ მასალებს როდის ატვირთავთ? მასალებს გამოგიგზავნით დღეს ამ ტრენინგის შემდგომ გუშინდელს და დღევანდელ მასალას. როდესაც არის ინგლისურ ენაზე. და რაც შეეხება ვიდეო ჩანაწერებს, ვიდეო ჩანაწერები მომავალი კვირიდან გათავსდება Facebook გვერდზე და ლინკებსაც გამოგიგზავნით ვიდეო ჩანაწერებს.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, I'm back.
Garrett, we have some questions. We mentioned it in the chat.
Happens during the water okay. The other question is, does phosphoric acid really work as source of phosphorus in high pH soil? As far as my understanding is, the phosphoric acid is not, for agronomic or the plant benefit. Okay. So it helps lower the pH of the soil. But the phosphate, mineral phosphate fertilizers would be more effective and maybe more cost effective as well. I don't have some ready research experience or trial experience on how much phosphorus the trees can get, but I will have to check on that, and I can find it out for you. But as far as my understanding is, we apply the mineral forms in terms of phosphate fertilizers that can be taken up by the plants. Do you have experience using iron sulfate as a foliar spray for iron deficiency correction? Does it have effect? Yes, I think the iron foliar sprays, iron sulfate, it will definitely have an effect in correcting the deficiency. However, that's not a usually industry-wide practice because that can be really expensive and a short-term solution to a long-term problem. So if you have an iron deficiency showing on your trees, I would suggest definitely look at what's happening below ground and then try to work there to build that up. Now, I mentioned in the slides that sometimes you have severe deficiency and you don't want to lose the season. Yes, definitely you can apply foliar. In my experience, people have done that to actually correct the deficiency in the season, but it's not a sustainable solution. And can we apply it before bloom by drip irrigation? Oh, the phosphoric acid question, right? Can we apply it before bloom by drip fertigation? So I have to check on that because we don't apply. There are other things that you need to consider when you're applying the phosphoric acid, and one of the things is the soil microbial health. So soil microbial health, and there are concerns in certain soils where continuous applications of the acid to lower pH have disrupted the soil microbial composition. So, I would put a consideration to that as well. So to answer your question, before bloom by drip irrigation, so if you're going to actually apply it as an amendment, I think you can apply before season begins, so that once you apply your fertilizers in season, it enhances the uptake of those fertilizers. So I don't think there would be any problem in applying before bloom, but I have not I've not come across any practices or any particular research on timing of application, if there is any difference in that. What is the dosage of potassium and phosphorus for almond trees calculated by a kernel? Okay, phosphorus. Let me go back to my notes. I know potassium, the trees need every 1,000 pounds. The tree, 1,000 kernel pounds, the tree needs about 75 pounds of potassium. Let me get to that. Okay. Oh, here we have it here. Okay. So that is nitrogen. Did potassium go? I had the numbers for California actually. I'm just looking them up. Just bear with me. Okay. That's nitrogen. Okay, so I will have to actually go back to the slide. Roughly, I think about 5 pounds for every 1,000 pounds of kernel of potassium. Non-predator removes 68 pounds of nitrogen for every 1,000 pounds of crop, and it removes about phosphorus is about 10-12 pounds for every 1,000 pound. So those are the numbers. So I had that on one of my slides, but I'm not able to get to those numbers. but I think I'm pretty close, because that's what we always, consider when we're talking about the uptake. Okay, so the application phosphate applications, I had listed here from what we had. So, and we have the potassium muriate of potassium chloride that is used in soils where you don't have, and then we have the KTS for potassium. A lot of people applied potassium thiosulfate KTS that supplies potassium along with sulfur. Okay, for phosphate formulations, I have to check, with the actual growers that what kind of the phosphate we apply. So I cannot give you examples without checking. So the next question is, your opinion on potassium chloride or potassium sulfate once at the end of the dormancy period? Okay. Okay, that's a good question. So now it goes back to the leaching potential. Okay, and I can tell you in potassium, the sulfate, it depends on the leaching potential. So some of can actually leach more readily than the others. So you need to make sure that that doesn't happen during the dormancy period. I don't have any experience on these two in terms of at the at the fall, or make sure that your fertilizers down. Okay. Once at the end of the dormancy period, you mean before the season starts, particularly when the season starts and you apply heavy irrigations all the time, then one single application of potassium fertilizer, I can look at either of these formulations, that can probably cause some uptake issues later in the season, because every irrigation is going to push potassium down. I have seen potassium deficiencies in soils where you are not spoon feeding potassium. So that can be an issue in low cation exchange capacity soils. So that you have to keep in mind. I hope that helps. In which phase should we select hull for the testing, and how much boron zinc should we apply? Okay, the phase of hull samples is right at harvest. When you are harvesting the trees, just separate the hulls, and right at harvest, you just give the hulls for testing to the lab, and you will get your sample results well in time by the fall application if you're low on boron. The boron rates are for, it depends on soil application versus foliar application. We, in the soil, typically in fall, we put about 20 pounds of solubor per acre when you're putting large amounts in soil in fall. Okay, and then for the zinc sulfate application, typically between 20 to 30 pounds per acre of zinc sulfate. That translates to about the same 20 to 30 kilograms per hectare. So that is the application rates that we apply. And then they can vary. Boron application rates can vary based on your hull boron levels. In young trees, tree doesn't have fruit yet, how much NPK should we apply and proportions for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium? Okay. For the young trees, we need to consider the growth potential every year. Okay. So one general recommendation for nitrogen application to the non-bearing trees is that we have a rule of thumb in general based on research that when the yield is lower than 1,000 pounds, which is the younger trees, every year we need to apply 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre just for the vegetative growth. Okay, so to the young trees, 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre is roughly 30 kilograms per hectare. Okay, so that is what is needed just for the vegetative growth. The research that I showed you for the first year, on a per acre basis, that is what the number comes again in that trial. Okay, so that's the requirement, yearly requirement for vegetative growth, about 30 kilograms per hectare. How much NPK? The proportion of P and K, I would follow the leaf levels for P and K, particularly for potassium. For the K, I would just go by the leaf levels, and if the leaf levels are adequate, about around 1.5%, then I would just apply a little bit of potassium along with the NPK blend, whatever comes in the NPK blend. If you apply 15 in the first year, then in the second year, third year, you can probably cut down on your phosphorus and potassium because there is not enough fruit. By the time the trees start bearing the fruit, we need more potassium because potassium is needed for fruit development. Again, the potassium requirements for 1,000 pounds is about 70 pounds of potassium for every 1,000 pounds. So I'm trying to convert those while I'm speaking. I'm trying to convert those into kilograms. But so when your trees are so young, they are not producing, excuse me, they're not producing heavily. You can just convert whatever production you are expecting to get in year 3 or year 4. And based on that production, you just cut down as a percentage of that potassium that you need to apply. So if 1,000 pounds, if in 30 year, you're going to produce 1,000 pounds, that means you're going to apply 70 pounds of potassium. So that is the rough calculation that you can do. Again, for phosphate, I mentioned that phosphate requirement, phosphorus requirement is about 10 pounds. And I think it's about 10 pounds of phosphate, not the actual P. That's the 10 pounds of P2O5 for every 1,000 pounds of crop removed. So if you irrigated with the NPK blend like 15 or 12, that supplied enough phosphorus to the soil, then you can just check the soil levels of your phosphorus. You might have already built enough phosphorus. You don't have to apply phosphorus every year until you start getting a good crop that actually removes about 10 pounds of phosphate every year. So those are the numbers you need to replenish. Even if the trees are young, they are still going to produce a little bit of crop in the 3rd or the 4th year. So you have to consider that. In very young trees, like first trees, like I said, when you're applying 15-15 for the nitrogen requirement, it has 15% phosphorus, 15% potassium. That will provide enough phosphate and potassium to the trees for growth. Okay, so these are all the questions on the chat. So any more questions? I can pull up the nutrient demand slides so that if we want to discuss those. So this is the slide that I wanted to show you, the in-season demand, the nitrogen demand for the almond trees. So rates are based on the phenology of California cultivars. So this is the nitrogen in-season nitrogen demand that follows the in-season growth. And that goes typically from bloom time, from nut set time, all the way to the harvest, or the right after harvest. So this is what I was talking about when I said that we apply about 80% of total nitrogen budget to the crop before harvest. So there were some other considerations here. I have my potassium and phosphorus demand slides in another presentation. So I will just check them out and send an email to the organizers. Okay. Okay. So any more questions?
თუ არის რაიმე შეკითხვები, დავსვათ თუნდაც ქართულად, ან მოვიწეროთ.
should we make dormant nitrogen applications before bloom? Do you recommend?
What was that?
Dormant nitrogen application before bloom, late dormant.
Oh, the nitrogen application before bloom?
Yes.
Yeah, we do not typically recommend nitrogen application in late dormant. The soil temperatures are really low for the uptake. The trees are not taking up any nitrogen in the from the soil. There is enough nitrogen reserves from storage that the trees are using. And if we applied any nitrogen in the late dormant phase, there is still chance of rain in the season. So that's basically a loss that we don't want to recommend. So the typical application of nitrogen into the soil through irrigation comes right after fruit set, not even at fruit set. Some farmers try to apply some nitrogen right around fruit set time, but the university does not recommend that.
Fruit set, do you mean leaf out period?
Yeah, around right around leaf out. Fruit set happens right after bloom, and the leaves are still coming out at that time, right?
Okay,
so
thank you.
Yeah, and when the leaves are coming out, the plant starts evapotranspiration. That's when the nitrogen uptake starts happening. So that's when we match the first nitrogen application.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hello, in Georgia, we usually have potassium-rich soils.
Mhm.
So should we really be applying potassium? If we calculate, we might have soils that we have more than 1,000 kgs per hectare in a soil as a potassium. So should we still apply potassium, or just we can check the leaf analysis, and if it's enough, we don't have to apply potassium at all?
No, yeah, that's a very good question. So no, you don't need to. It's all about monitoring. If you monitor your soil potassium levels and you have enough abundance of potassium, and you don't need to apply. And that is true for phosphate as well. That's the reason we don't apply many phosphate fertilizers. And only one of the phosphate fertilizers that I mentioned in my presentation is the ammonium phosphate, right? But same for calcium. Same for potassium. If you have abundance in native soils, you don't need to. But make sure you check in the leaf tissue report, because it is the leaves that will tell you that the trees are taking up or not. And I don't see the problem unless you have really high leaching potential. I mean, if you have natively abundant potassium in the soil, I'm sure the cation exchange capacity of those soils are going to be high, that the potassium is there. And if the leaves are showing adequate potassium, then you don't need to. I mean, more than adequate, it seems like. So that's the reason we lay a lot of emphasis on monitoring the levels throughout the year, both in the soil and in the leaves. Okay, there is one more question. We are recommended to apply large amount of potassium and magnesium sulfate for pH correction. Okay, so okay, yes. So for pH correction, it's normal to apply the sulfate formulations because the sulfate basically reacts with the hydrogen ions in the soil, and it creates acidic conditions to lower the pH. Okay, so that's the usual recommendation. The sulfate formulations of potassium and magnesium sulfate basically also builds potassium reserves in the soil, and also magnesium, which is another important component in high pH calcareous soils. You need to have magnesium buildup as well. That helps in improving the soil health. So yes, sulfate formulations, potassium, magnesium sulfate, they're good amendments and recommendations. You don't always need to go with the acid applications all the time. That is a severe severe solution if your pH is really high.
One more question.
Yes.
In presentation, you mentioned about calcium nitrate application, and if we have calcium-rich soils, probably in California you also have the calcium-rich soils, or not? Should you use calcium nitrate? Because I believe that calcium may not be available for the plants all the time, but if we use by drip irrigation, it will be available, and it will help development of the trees, or it's not correct?
So calcium is important for cropping system in two ways. One is calcium actually interacts with other cations in the soil, particularly if you have issues with sodium. So you need to have more calcium and magnesium to counteract the sodium. Okay, so that's why you need to build calcium reserves, because in sodium affected soils, calcium improves water penetration. Okay, when you have abundant calcium in the soil. Other thing is calcium is also important for the fruit development and for the overall tree health inside the tree. Okay, if you remember, calcium is a part of the cell walls. So everywhere when you have fruit development, when you have leaf development, calcium is really important. So it's good to build on calcium. So that's why the calcium ammonium nitrate is applied in California, because it supplies calcium. Other formulations of some formation of calcium, they are hard to apply through the drip irrigation because that can clog the drip system. So calcium ammonium nitrate CAN 17 is one of the formulations that can easily be applied in the solution, in the irrigation. Do we need some additional manipulations if the soil pH is around 8 to 8.2? So yeah, if the soil pH is higher than 7.5, you need to manage that pH. But pH around 8 to 8.2, you can do the calculations, the applications of different formulations. For example, we talked about the sulfate forms or gypsum to neutralize the pH. So yes, I would say you would need to do some kind of amendments if the pH is higher than 8, because that will help uptake of micronutrients, that will help build the soil health if you bring the pH lower to the range of 7. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, let's see. So from today's discussion, from today's question, I just need to confirm the potassium and the P2O5 uptake requirements, numbers from the literature based on California research, because what I told you is all the ballpark numbers. So I would just go back to that research paper and then confirm that those are the correct numbers. Other than that, there was a question about phosphate fertilizers. I'm only familiar with the ammonium phosphate that we use here. In California, phosphate is not a big issue, so we don't have, many people applying phosphate. So those are the two questions that I just needed to check on. So then do you want me to go, we have some time, do you want me to go over the concepts of, developing the nitrogen budget, or any other basic concepts that I have in the, this is another thing that I wanted to show you. As well. So this is always a good reminder. Look at the pH scale here, right? On the bottom, this is the pH scale. This is pH 8. So between 8 and 8.5, that's the range of uptake. Now the nitrogen also tapers into yellow and blue. Green means you have the best uptake of this nutrient element in this pH range. Okay, so right around 8 and 8.5, we are starting to see iron chlorosis, lime-induced iron chlorosis. Okay, same for manganese, boron, copper, and zinc. Okay, so at the pH of above 8, you get into all these issues. Okay, so this is really a good reference guide that I always refer to when talking about nutrient management, particularly micronutrients.
If boron is binded in alkaline soils, do we need halated forms of boron, or we can apply any of them?
For boron?
Yes.
So I haven't seen any issues of the boron. What is that? What is the formulation of solubor? That is the. I will have to check the formula of that, but and then we have the boric acid as well, the borate that we apply. So those are the two formulations that we apply here in all different kinds of soils, and we haven't seen any uptake issues. So I don't think we need to apply the chelated form for I think the main consideration is to basically maintain a good pH range. So if you have high pH, then you might have some issues in some soils, but I have not seen that being needed here, in my knowledge.
This scheme applies to different crops or only for almonds?
Oh, this is in general, this is a general guideline for the soil conditions and the micronutrient uptake. So that is applicable to the tree crops, at least. Yeah.
Thanks.
As I know, there are no boron chelates because there are chelates for usually for cations, and boron is anion, is not it? I think there are no boron chelate forms available.
Yeah, I have not heard about any boron chelates or any boron any compounds that will actually, bind and help uptake. Yeah, I have not heard of any. So we have iron and copper. Those are usually applied in the chelated form.
I have one question about ammonium form of nitrogen. Usually, if we are talking about hydroponics and some open field crops like bananas, if they're applying a lot of ammonium form of nitrates, they're saying that it can compete with cations like potassium and calcium, and you get problems with rotting and rotting diseases. Does that kind of correlate with almonds, or it's not a problem in almonds at all to apply mostly ammonium form of nitrates? Because usually ammonium form is kind of cheaper, and we have high pH soil, and ammonium form would help decrease the pH as well. But is that gonna have some problems and issues with cation uptakes, or it's not a problem usually in almond trees, almond orchards?
Cation uptake, no, I have not come across any interaction of the ammonium, for example, ammonium sulfate. No, I've not seen any interaction and any example where ammonium sulfate will hinder the uptake of the cations. Now, the ammonium forms for the nitrogen, ammonium sulfate is good for applying the sulfate portion. Other than that, the preferred formulations, because the reason we go to urea or the nitrate formulations is the rapid uptake and availability, right? So, but those have also a negative, because the nitrate formulations leach down pretty quickly. So you have to do the spoon feeding. However, if you don't have the spoon feeding approach, then I think the ammonium forms would be better, because they hold on to the soil for a longer period of time. It's just that the ammonium takes time to convert into urea and then to nitrate. So it is like a weeks-long process. So that's the difference that that we have practically. Other than that, I don't think that there's any other interaction of other cation uptake with ammonium forms.
Thank you.
Will potassium chloride lower the pH? I don't know. Potassium chloride, yes, that can be explored. That's interesting, but I don't know if it's going to form the acidic byproduct with the hydrogen ions. But that's a good question. So we can actually, because I have not seen the potassium chloride or muriate of potash being used to lower the pH. So we usually either apply some sulfate containing formulations or straight away go with the acids. So yeah, I will definitely check on that, but I have not seen that practice, particularly to lower the pH.
მეგობრებო, შეგიძლიათ დასვათ შეკითხვა გუშინდელ თემასთან დაკავშირებითაც. So this is the chart that I developed from last year. I included this in last year's presentations, just to answer that question that I answered again a little while ago about the young trees and the nitrogen budget going to vegetative growth. If your yield is less than 1100 kilograms per hectare, your nitrogen demand is about 112 kilograms per hectare, and nitrogen needed for vegetative growth is 44% of that. So roughly around, that comes to about 40, 50 pounds of 50 kilograms per hectare. So the nitrogen needed for the vegetative growth as a percentage of the total nitrogen keeps on decreasing as the trees start producing more and more. So the young trees need about half of their nitrogen application for the vegetative growth when there is yield up to a little bit of yield up to 1100 kilograms. Now the 30 pounds per acre nitrogen figure that I gave you, that is from a research done in California that shows lower than 1,000 pounds per acre crop. So that's about 30 pounds per acre nitrogen. So the young trees almost need all the nitrogen that we supply they need for vegetative growth. Year 1 and year 2 trees when they're not producing. So that was
That was the nitrogen.
Those kilograms are not kernel, they are total production, yes?
Oh, this chart converted to the kilogram kernels. Yeah. For that chart, I converted the pounds per acre to kilograms per hectare. So that's kernel.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the nitrogen demand, the University of California research that was done on the tree nitrogen demands, that was based on 1,000 kernel crop, 1,000 pound kernel. So, yeah.
Yeah, but that production, more than 4,000 kilograms per hectare, is it even possible? So much production, or it's just a figure?
Okay, so let's go back. Okay, so 4,400, this is right. So
yes,
okay, 4,400 kilograms per hectare translates to roughly around what? If you about 4,500 pounds per acre, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah. So those that is the yield of best orchards in California. In fact, one of my friends who is a grower, this past year, he had 4,800 pounds per acre, kernel pounds.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah. So, but that is because he really knows what he's doing, and you know, there are a lot of farmers that actually the average for California is about 2,800. So 2,800 is more realistic what a normal person, you know, does with highly suitable soils and good quality water. The average of the best orchards falls between around 3,500. The ones 3,500 to 4,000. But then there are exceptional that can touch 4,500.
It's about?
What is that?
Your almonds in California is on hybrids, hybrid rootstocks, and in Georgia we have mostly bitter almond rootstock. So what we should wait for that rootstock? The half of these numbers, or how do you think?
Yeah, peach almond hybrid rootstocks, they are more vigorous and they are more resilient of marginal soil conditions, particularly soil salinity. So there are a lot of newer plantings that are peach almond hybrid rootstocks. However, in you know, regular sandy loam soils, good soil profile, and no soil salinity issues, Nimagard rootstock has been really high yielding rootstock. Nimagard rootstock is basically considered a medium vigor rootstock, and non-pearl is a high vigorous variety. So the combination of Nimagard with the non-pearl has worked really well for the industry, producing high yielding trees. You talked about bitter almond. So basically, I think the yield potential, I have not used bitter almond here, and I don't have personal experience with bitter almond, but based on the research, some of the results that I have seen, bitter almond performed alongside the plum rootstocks in their yield potential in terms of water use efficiency and others. So I would say that the varieties that you have, the European varieties that have lower kernel yields, plus if you have those bitter almond or wild type rootstocks, I would that's what I guesstimated yesterday. About half the yield potential of what I have listed here, about 2,000 kilograms per hectare, would be a good yield potential to aim for in Georgian conditions with that kind of germplasm.
Thank you.
Yes. So, I'm just pulling these random slides because I just wanted to show you some of the things. Oh, this is the next slide. When I was talking about application of nitrogen versus yield. So these are the pounds per hectare from the research I converted in kilograms per hectare. 125 pounds per acre roughly translates to 142 kilograms per hectare. So this is this research shows that increasing the nitrogen from 312 to 397 kilograms per hectare, the last two treatments did not increase nitrogen removal by the fruit. Okay, so it did not actually provide any benefit. So these top two, the blue line and the green line, they are the same in terms of nitrogen removal. We have also seen that any excess nitrogen that is applied and taken up by the tree, somehow it ends up in the hull. And the high nitrogen levels in the hull actually create problems like hull rot. So excessive nitrogen, in fact, actually creates problems than benefiting.
We are talking about actual nitrogen, yeah?
Yeah, this is actual nitrogen.
Okay.
This is N, yeah, not in any of the formulations. So you have to work out, based on the nitrogen percentage of any fertilizers, you can easily work those out. Yeah, that's what, when I mentioned that, we, based on the average yields in pounds kernel per acre, we apply around 250 to 300. That's the range that we have to apply here. And then, it depends on a lot of different factors, and the kernel yield is the most important of them. Let me go to any other slides that might be important. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. So then I think, if not, then I will work on those questions that you have. And then in the next session, we will start by answering some of those questions. And let me see if I can save the chat. Yes, please. Yes, please, go ahead.
საკმაოდ მაღალი მოსავლიანობა ქონდაო ერთ ახალზე და მეორის ციფრებია 44 თქვა მე მგონი თუ სწორად მახსოვს
4,500 pounds per acre. Yeah. 4,500. Let me convert it to per hectare really quickly.
500
divided by 2.47. Oh, it's 4,000 kilograms per hectare.
აჰა 4000 კილოგრამი მიიღო ჰექტარზე ეს როცა საშუალოდ 28 ფუნტიაო აკრზე როგორ თქვა გაიმეოროს საფშელი.
Oh, so he told me that his non-pearl yield came out to be 4,500 pounds per acre, which is exceptionally high. You know, he told me at a coffee shop after harvest. Last year.
კალიფორნიაში ხო?
That's in California. That's really close to Fresno. Conditions that he has really good soils, sandy loam soil. He is on the east side where we have plenty of high quality water coming from the mountains, no salt issues. And he follows, the practices like of irrigation and fertilization and all of that. When he talks to me, he is a farmer, but he is also a co-host of the radio show that I do every Sunday. So him and we both present the Sunday morning ag radio show here in Fresno. So whatever we discuss on the radio show, many of those shows, I speak about irrigation, fertilizer, other pest control. Many days, we get some university experts on different topics. So every Sunday, he goes back to his farm from the radio show and he takes notes of what was said and what did the experts say. So he's been doing that for the last 10 years. So basically he figured out a lot of things. Oh, and then one thing that I just wanted to add, there's a story with him. We did 2 years ago, we did a post-harvest radio show where we talked about hull boron content and hull boron testing. So how important is hull boron and how it can reduce yield if your boron is low. He went back from the radio station to his house and looked up his boron levels for the last couple of years. And the same day he fired his consultant because his consultant did not tell him about the boron levels. And he was wondering why his yield is so low. So he said, oh my God, I have never checked my boron levels. And thanks to the radio show that it happened. So then he did a good boron fertility program. So he's been doing the farming in a really good way. Yeah, but that exception, that's not normal. We have other examples like that, but.
თუ შეიძლება ერთი კითხვაც ამასთან დაკავშირებით, ესე იგი მეტრულ სისტემაში რო გადავიყვანოთ 8 ტონაზე მეტი გამოდის, დაახლოებით 8 ტონა 150 გამოდის საჰექტარო მოსავალი, ხა მაგან რაც თქვა თავის მეგობართან დაკავშირებით. ეს რომ როგორ არის გაშენებული ეს ბაღი თუ გვეტყვის მაგასაც რა, ინტენსიური, სუპერინტენსიური თუ კლასიკური განაშენიანება დაგეგმარება ბაღის.
Okay. Yeah, number one, 4,000 kernel pounds is in terms of in-shell. If you want in-shell in California, it is about 5,500 kilograms in-shell. They're not 8 tons. Because remember, the kernel yield of that variety is about 65%. Okay. So the in-shell weight is not 8 ton, it's not double. Okay, so that's one thing. This is a conventional orchard, and I believe it is planted to the row to row spacing is 6 meters, maybe six and a half. meters, but tree to tree spacing is the same, like 4.5 meters, 4.5 meters. Yeah, about 14, 15 feet. So it's a conventional orchard. Very good trees, huge trees. I go to those trees every couple of months. So they are about 15, 16-year-old trees.
ეს ნაჭუჭიან მოსავალზე თქვა 4500 ფუნტი აკრზე?
No, that's the kernel.
მე როგორც გავიგე, ანუ გამოსავლიანობა არის ძალიან მაღალიო, 79%-მდე თქვა.
65%. კი ბატონო, non-parallel აქვს მასეთი გამოსავლიანობა.
65% kernel yield. Yeah.
და ამიტომ ეს კერნელი გული ზუსტად ორჯერ არ გავამალოთ რა.
ამლობა.
როგორც ხედავ, კითხვა არის დასმული ჩატში კიდევ.
Okay, let me see. What would you say about peach rootstock for almonds? How efficient is it? There are a lot of peach-based rootstocks. We have Nimangard, Guardian, in California soils. There are things that create problems for them. If there is a high pH or high salinity, or if there are some nematode issues, then those peach rootstocks are not used. But other than that, the peach rootstocks for almonds have been used historically, and they're really good producers. Thank you.
თუ გვაქვს კიდე აბა რაიმე შეკითხვები, თუ არა და ნელ-ნელა შეგვიძლია დავამშვიდობოთ ბატონ ბრარს.
კითხვა წამოვიდა.
Okay, yeah, so Miriam has a question. What should be the pH for the peach rootstock then? If I have to tell you based on just my experience with the peach-based and peach almond hybrid rootstocks, the ideal pH soil is between 6.5 to 7.5 for the peach-based rootstocks to perform their best really well. So between 6.5 to 7.5 being a rootstock would be that kind of rootstock. That's my general experience. All right, so I think it's 9:30 already, and Friday night for you. So okay. I feel for you, but thank you for sticking around for so long.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett.
It is. Thanks all participants, and have a great weekend.
დიდი მადლობა ყველას და მასალებსაც მოგაწვით გუშინდელი და დღევანდელი, ასე ვთქვათ, სესიის. და მომავალ ხუჩავას პარასკევს კიდევ შევხვდებით და მე ერთი დღით ადრე გაგახსენებთ მაინც.
მადლობა ნახვამდის.
აბა დროებით.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Okay. Thank you. Have a
Have a
good
good day.
weekend. Bye.